The scissors gleamed under the fluorescent classroom lights as Jessica Chen held them inches from the delicate silver chain around Maya Rodriguez's wrist. The entire AP chemistry class had fallen silent, their equations forgotten as they watched the scene unfold at the back lab table. Maya's dark eyes darted between the sharp blades and Jessica's cold smile, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. "Please don't," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "It was my grandmother's." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jessica's perfectly glossed lips curved into something that might have been mistaken for a smile, if not for the cruelty dancing in her blue eyes. Should have thought about that before you decided to show off, charity case. The bracelet wasn't much to look at, really. Tarnished silver with a small charm shaped like a hummingbird, the kind of jewelry you might find at a thrift store or tucked away in someone's old jewelry box. But to Maya, it was everything. The last gift from Abuela Carmen before the cancer took her voice, then her strength, then finally her gentle presence that had been Maya's anchor through 15 years of moving from town to town, school to school, always chasing her father's construction jobs. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Riverside High School, with Maya clutching her worn backpack straps as she navigated the crowded hallways filled with students who had known each other since kindergarten. She had been at Riverside for exactly 3 weeks, long enough to understand the unspoken rules but not long enough to find her place within them. The building itself was a maze of beige lockers and motivational posters, the kind of suburban high school that prided itself on test scores and college acceptance rates while turning a blind eye to the social warfare happening in its classrooms. Maya had learned to keep her head down, to speak only when spoken to make herself as invisible as possible. It was a survival strategy she had perfected over the years, moving through 7 different schools as her father Carlos chased work across 3 states. But invisibility, she was learning, was a luxury that girls like her couldn't always afford. The trouble had started during lunch the previous Friday when Maya made the mistake of sitting at what she thought was an empty table in the cafeteria. She had unpacked her homemade sandwich and thermos of coffee, grateful for a quiet spot near the windows where she could people watch without drawing attention to herself. The cafeteria was an ecosystem unto itself, with each table representing a different social stratum. The athletes dominated the center tables, their Letterman jackets and confident laughter marking their territory. The theater kids claimed the corner near the stage, dramatic gestures punctuating their conversations about auditions and opening nights. The honor students sat in neat rows near the faculty table, their conversation a mixture of college applications and weekend study groups. Maya had chosen what appeared to be neutral territory, a table that seemed to belong to no particular group. She had been wrong. "Excuse me, but you're in our spot." The voice belonged to Jessica Chen, whose father owned 3 restaurants in town and whose mother sat on the school board. Jessica was the kind of beautiful that came with money and careful maintenance, professionally straightened hair, designer clothes that fit perfectly, skin that had never known the harsh reality of store-brand skincare. She stood flanked by her constant companions, Brittany Walsh and Chloe Martinez, a trio that moved through Riverside High like they owned it. Maya had looked around the empty table, confusion flickering across her features. "I'm sorry, I didn't see any bags or anything. I can move if—" "You can move, period," Brittany had interrupted, her voice carrying the particular brand of disdain that teenage girls wielded like a weapon. Brittany was Jessica's lieutenant, the kind of girl who had learned early that attaching herself to someone powerful was easier than building power of her own. Her red hair was always perfectly curled, her makeup always flawless, her smile always sharp enough to cut glass. Chloe had said nothing, but her silence was complicit. She was the follower, the one who laughed at the right moments and provided an audience for Jessica's performances. Unlike the other two, Chloe sometimes looked uncomfortable during these encounters, but discomfort had never been enough to make her speak up. Maya had gathered her things without argument, her cheeks burning with embarrassment as she felt the eyes of nearby tables watching the exchange. She had found another seat, finished her lunch in silence, and thought that would be the end of it. She had been wrong about that too. Over the next week, the harassment had been subtle but persistent. Maya would find her locker combination changed, forcing her to visit the office and explain the situation to increasingly skeptical secretaries. Her homework would disappear from her backpack, leading to awkward conversations with teachers who clearly wondered if she was making excuses. Once, she found her bicycle tires slashed in the parking lot, though she couldn't prove who had done it. The worst part wasn't the individual incidents, but the way they made her question her own perceptions. When 3 girls walked past her in the hallway and burst into laughter, were they laughing at her or something else entirely? When her chemistry lab partner suddenly requested a change, was it because of something she had done, or because someone had gotten to him first? The constant uncertainty was exhausting in a way that direct confrontation would never have been. Maya had dealt with bullies before. At Jefferson Middle School in Arizona, there had been Tyler Morrison, who thought her accent was hilarious and would mimic her pronunciation of certain English words until she stopped speaking in class altogether. At Lincoln High in Nevada, Sarah Beth Williams had spread rumors that Maya's family was in the country illegally, leading to humiliating encounters with teachers who suddenly looked at her differently. But Jessica Chen was different. She was smarter, more calculating. Where other bullies had relied on brute force or obvious cruelty, Jessica understood the power of plausible deniability. She never left fingerprints on her destruction, never provided evidence that could be traced back to her. She was a master of the kind of psychological warfare that adults dismissed as, quote, typical teenage drama, but that could destroy a person from the inside out. The bracelet had become a target purely by accident. Maya had been reaching for her textbook during English class when her sleeve had ridden up, revealing the delicate silver chain around her wrist. Mrs. Patterson, their elderly English teacher who still believed in the power of personal connection, had noticed the charm. "What a lovely hummingbird," Mrs. Patterson had said, her voice warm with genuine interest. "Is there a story behind it?" Maya had felt heat creep up her neck as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and certainly not for something positive. "My grandmother gave it to me," she had said quietly. She said hummingbirds represent joy and resilience. "How beautiful," Mrs. Patterson had continued, oblivious to the way Jessica's eyes had narrowed from 3 rows away. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Maya had replied, her voice catching slightly on the past tense. "She passed away last year." The sympathy in Mrs. Patterson's eyes had been genuine, but Maya had felt the shift in the room's energy. She had made herself vulnerable, shared something real and meaningful. And in the ecosystem of high school, vulnerability was blood in the water. Jessica had pounced during the transition between classes, cornering Maya by her locker with surgical precision. "Sweet story about your dead grandma," she had said, her voice pitched low enough that passing students couldn't hear. "Too bad she couldn't afford to get you something that wasn't obviously fake." Maya had wanted to explain that the bracelet wasn't fake, that Abuela Carmen had saved for months to buy it, that she had presented it to Maya on her quinceañera with tears in her eyes and hands that shook with the early tremors of her illness. But explanations required engagement, and engagement with Jessica Chen was a trap that Maya had learned to avoid. The attack during chemistry class had been the inevitable escalation. Maya had been assigned to Jessica's lab table by pure alphabetical misfortune, Rodriguez coming after Chen in Mr. Peterson's seating chart. They were supposed to be working together on a titration experiment, measuring precise amounts of acid and base to find the point of neutralization. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that they were literally studying balance while Jessica worked to destroy hers. Mr. Peterson was one of those teachers who believed that students learned best when left to figure things out for themselves. He spent most of class periods at his desk, grading papers and trusting that his students were mature enough to handle potentially dangerous chemicals without constant supervision. It was an approach that worked well for most students, but created opportunities for others. Jessica had waited until Mr. Peterson was deep in conversation with a student at the front of the room before making her move. She had been building toward this moment all morning, making small comments about Maya's worn sneakers, her second-hand backpack, the way she pronounced certain words when she was nervous. Each comment was designed to chip away at Maya's confidence, to make her feel smaller and more isolated. "You know what I don't understand," Jessica had said as she measured out their solution, her voice conversational but carrying enough edge to make Maya tense. Why people insist on wearing fake jewelry. Like, we all know you can't afford the real thing. Why pretend? Maya had focused on recording their measurements, her handwriting careful and precise. She had learned that engagement only encouraged escalation, that the best strategy was to become as uninteresting as possible. But Jessica wasn't interested in being ignored. "I'm talking to you, Maria." The deliberate mispronunciation of her name was designed to sting, and it worked. Maya's pen stilled on the paper, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "My name is Maya," she had said quietly, not looking up from her notebook. "Maya, Maria, whatever." Jessica had shrugged, but there was satisfaction in her voice at having gotten a response. "The point is, that tacky little bracelet of yours is obviously costume jewelry. My mom has a jewelry store, so I know quality when I see it. That's not silver, it's probably nickel or something equally cheap." Maya's hand had instinctively moved to her wrist, covering the bracelet protectively. The gesture was small but telling, and Jessica's eyes had lit up with predatory interest. "Oh, I hit a nerve, didn't I?" Jessica had continued, her voice taking on a saccharine sweetness that made Maya's skin crawl. "Let me guess, it has sentimental value? Some tragic backstory about a dead relative who couldn't afford to leave you anything real." The accuracy of the guess had been like a slap, and Maya had finally looked up to meet Jessica's eyes. What she saw there wasn't just cruelty, but genuine pleasure at having found something that could hurt her. It was the look of someone who enjoyed causing pain for its own sake. "Leave it alone," Maya had said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Or what?" Jessica had laughed, the sound bright and musical in a way that made it more unsettling. "You'll tell a teacher?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Good luck with that. Everyone knows I'm a straight-A student from a good family. You're just another scholarship kid with an attitude problem. That was when Jessica had produced the scissors, the ones from the supply caddy that every lab table was equipped with for cutting filter paper and rubber tubing. She had held them casually at first, using them to point at different parts of their experiment as she continued her verbal assault. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the scissors had moved closer to Maya's wrist. "The thing about fake jewelry," Jessica had continued, her voice taking on an academic tone as if she were discussing their chemistry experiment, "is that it's so fragile. Real silver has tensile strength, you know, but the cheap stuff that poor people buy, it breaks so easily." Maya had tried to pull her hand away, but Jessica had been faster, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. The scissors had moved to the bracelet's delicate chain, the metal cold against Maya's skin. "Please," Maya had whispered, all pretense of indifference abandoned. "Please don't." The word "please" had seemed to energize Jessica, her grip tightening as her smile widened. Around them, their classmates had begun to notice the commotion, conversations dying as heads turned toward their table. But no one moved to intervene. This was the power of Jessica's reputation. The way her family's influence had created a bubble of immunity around her actions. "What's the magic word?" Jessica had taunted, the scissors now pressed against the bracelet's chain. "Oh, wait, you already said please. How about, I'm sorry for being a pathetic charity case who doesn't belong here." Maya had felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she had refused to let them fall. Crying would only make Jessica's victory complete, would give her the ammunition she needed to turn this moment into a legend that would follow Maya through the rest of her time at Riverside High. "I won't say that," Maya had said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying a note of steel that surprised even her. Jessica's eyes had flashed with something dangerous. "Then I guess your precious bracelet is going to have an accident." That was when Mr. Peterson had finally looked up from his grading, his attention drawn by the unusual quiet that had fallen over the classroom. But his intervention had come too late. Jessica had already positioned the scissors, had already made her choice. The only question now was whether Maya would break first, or if Jessica would follow through on her threat. The seconds stretched like hours as Maya felt the cold metal of the scissors against her skin. She could smell Jessica's expensive perfume, could see the perfect application of her lip gloss, could hear the subtle sound of her classmates breathing as they watched the drama unfold. This was the moment that would define the rest of her time at Riverside High, the moment that would determine whether she would be just another victim of Jessica Chen's particular brand of cruelty. But Maya Rodriguez had survived 7 schools, 3 states, and the loss of the person who had meant most to her in the world. She had learned to be resilient, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. And as she looked into Jessica's cold blue eyes, she made a decision that would surprise everyone in that chemistry classroom, including herself. The bracelet might break, but Maya wouldn't. Not today, and not for Jessica Chen. What happened next would become the stuff of Riverside High legend, a story that would be retold in hushed tones for years to come. But for now, in this frozen moment before everything changed, Maya Rodriguez was just a girl trying to protect the last piece of her grandmother's love from someone who had never understood what real strength looked like. The scissors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The sharp snap of breaking metal echoed through the chemistry classroom like a gunshot. Jessica's scissors had done their work with surgical precision, severing the delicate chain that had circled Maya's wrist for over a year. The hummingbird charm tumbled toward the floor in what seemed like slow motion, its tarnished silver catching the harsh fluorescent light one last time before disappearing beneath the lab table. For a heartbeat, the room remained frozen in shocked silence. Even Jessica seemed momentarily stunned by what she had done, the scissors still poised in her manicured hand as if she couldn't quite believe her own actions. Then Maya's sharp intake of breath shattered the spell, and 28 students simultaneously remembered how to breathe. "Oops," Jessica said with theatrical innocence, her voice carrying just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "How clumsy of me. Guess it wasn't real silver after all." Maya dropped to her knees without a word, her hands scrambling across the grimy linoleum floor in desperate search of the charm. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she felt beneath chair legs and around table supports, her fingers encountering nothing but dust and forgotten pencil erasers. The hummingbird had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. "Looking for something?" Brittany Walsh's voice dripped with false concern as she leaned back in her chair, deliberately blocking Maya's search path with her designer boots. "Maybe you should have been more careful with your jewelry." Chloe Martinez shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her dark eyes darting between Maya's frantic searching and Jessica's satisfied smirk. For a moment it looked like she might say something, might offer to help, or at least move her chair out of the way. But the moment passed, and Chloe remained silent, complicit in her inaction. Mr. Peterson finally looked up from his desk, his aging eyes taking in the scene with growing confusion. "What's all the commotion back there? Miss Chen, Miss Rodriguez, is there a problem?" Jessica's transformation was instantaneous and flawless. Her cruel smile melted into an expression of innocent bewilderment, her posture shifting from predatory to helpful. "No problem, Mr. Peterson. Maya just dropped something. I was trying to help her find it." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that even Maya felt a moment of doubt about what had actually happened. This was Jessica's greatest weapon, not her cruelty, but her ability to rewrite reality in real time, to make her victims question their own perceptions and experiences. "Well, clean up quickly," Mr. Peterson said, already turning his attention back to his papers. "We need to finish this experiment before the period ends." Maya's hands stilled on the floor, the futility of her search finally penetrating through her panic. The charm was gone, lost somewhere in the maze of chair legs and backpack straps, or perhaps deliberately kicked away by one of Jessica's allies. Either way, it might as well have been on the moon for all the chance she had of finding it in the next 30 minutes. She rose slowly to her feet, her knees aching from the hard floor, and her heart aching from something much deeper. The broken chain dangled from her wrist like an accusation, its severed end catching the light with each small movement of her hand. Without the hummingbird charm, it was just a piece of damaged metal, worthless and pathetic. "Don't look so dramatic," Jessica whispered as Maya sank back into her seat. "It was probably worth $5. I'm sure your welfare check can cover a replacement." The comment about welfare was particularly cruel because it was partially true. Maya's family didn't receive government assistance, but they lived paycheck to paycheck in a way that made $5 a significant expense. Carlos Rodriguez worked construction when the weather allowed and odd jobs when it didn't, always one injury or missed day away from financial disaster. Maya's mother Elena cleaned houses and offices, her hands perpetually raw from harsh chemicals and endless scrubbing. They weren't poor by choice or circumstance, but by the simple mathematics of working-class life in modern America. Every dollar was allocated before it was earned, every unexpected expense a potential catastrophe. The bracelet had represented months of Abuela Carmen's careful saving, quarters and dollar bills hidden in a coffee can until there was enough for something special for her granddaughter's 15th birthday. "The assignment," Maya said quietly, her voice thick with unshed tears but surprisingly steady. "We should finish the assignment." Jessica's eyebrows rose in surprise. She had expected tears, pleading, perhaps even a physical altercation that would give her an excuse to play the victim. But Maya's quiet dignity in the face of deliberate cruelty was something she hadn't anticipated, and it unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. For the remaining 20 minutes of class, they worked in tense silence. Maya recorded their measurements with mechanical precision, her handwriting slightly shakier than usual but still legible. Jessica made increasingly ridiculous comments designed to provoke a reaction, but Maya responded to none of them. She had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, to a place where Jessica's words couldn't reach. The broken chain remained on Maya's wrist, a constant reminder of what she had lost. Every few minutes, her fingers would unconsciously reach for the absent charm, muscle memory seeking comfort that was no longer there. Each time the gesture came up empty, the loss hit her anew, a fresh wave of grief for something that had been more than jewelry. When the bell finally rang, Maya was the first to gather her materials. She moved with quick efficiency, shoving her notebook and pen into her backpack without her usual careful organization. She needed to escape, to find somewhere private where she could fall apart without providing Jessica with additional entertainment. But Jessica wasn't finished with her entertainment. "Maya, wait up!" Jessica called out as they filed toward the door. Her voice was pitched to carry, ensuring that their departing classmates would witness whatever came next. "I feel terrible about your bracelet. Really, truly awful." Maya paused at the threshold, her hand gripping the doorframe hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She didn't turn around, didn't trust herself to look at Jessica's face without doing something that would give the girl exactly what she wanted. "I was thinking," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with false sincerity, "maybe we could take up a collection. You know, help you buy a replacement. I'm sure everyone would be happy to chip in a few quarters for such a good cause." The suggestion was designed to be maximum humiliation, positioning Maya as a charity case while allowing Jessica to play the role of generous benefactor. It was manipulation at its finest, cruel but deniable, hurtful but technically helpful. "That won't be necessary," Maya said without turning around. Her voice was quiet but clear, audible to the students still gathering their things. "But thank you for your concern." The politeness of her response seemed to catch Jessica off guard. She had expected anger, tears, or at least some acknowledgement of the power dynamic between them. But Maya's refusal to engage, her insistence on maintaining her dignity even in defeat, was frustrating in ways that Jessica couldn't quite name. Maya left the classroom without another word, walking with measured steps down the hallway as conversation swirled around her. She could feel eyes following her progress, could hear the whispered speculation about what had happened in Mr. Peterson's chemistry class. By tomorrow, the story would have spread throughout Riverside High, twisted and embellished with each retelling until it bore little resemblance to the truth. She made it to the nearest bathroom before the tears finally came. The old-fashioned facilities were empty during class time, offering her a few minutes of privacy to process what had happened. She locked herself in the farthest stall and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to cry for her grandmother, for the bracelet, for the unfairness of a world where cruelty was rewarded and kindness was punished. When the 3 minutes were up, she dried her eyes and walked to the sink. Her reflection in the spotted mirror showed red-rimmed eyes and slightly smudged mascara, but she looked stronger than she felt. The broken chain still hung from her wrist, and after a moment's consideration, she removed it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Wearing it without the charm would only invite more comments, more opportunities for Jessica to twist the knife. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that died abruptly whenever Maya approached. Word of the incident had spread with the efficiency that only high school gossip could achieve, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By lunch, Maya had supposedly attacked Jessica with scissors. By the final bell, she had threatened to burn down the chemistry lab. Maya kept her head down and said nothing to correct the rumors. She had learned from experience that defending yourself only gave people more to talk about, that silence was sometimes the only dignity available to the powerless. She went through the motions of attending classes, taking notes, participating when directly asked, but part of her remained in that chemistry classroom, watching her grandmother's final gift scatter across the floor. It wasn't until she was walking to her locker after final period that Maya realized she was being followed. The awareness came gradually, a prickling sensation between her shoulder blades that made her glance back several times. Each time she saw different students in the hallway, none of whom seemed to be paying her any particular attention. But the feeling persisted, a sixth sense honed by years of being the outsider, the target, the one who had to watch her back. She stopped at her locker and worked the combination with deliberate calm, using the metal door as a shield while she scanned the hallway behind her. There, Brittany Walsh, pretending to examine something in her own locker 3 doors down. And there, Chloe Martinez, lingering by the water fountain with no apparent purpose. They were positioning themselves, creating a formation that would allow them to corner her when she tried to leave. Maya's heart rate increased, but she forced herself to move normally. She gathered her homework and closed her locker with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else. The hallway was emptying as students headed home or to after-school activities, which meant fewer witnesses, but also fewer potential allies. She had 2 choices: confront the situation directly, or try to avoid it entirely. The old Maya, the one who had survived 7 schools by keeping her head down and making herself invisible, would have chosen avoidance. She would have found a teacher's classroom to hide in, or taken the long way to the parking lot, or simply waited until the building was completely empty. But the old Maya had never had something as precious as Abuela Carmen's bracelet destroyed in front of her. The old Maya had never felt the particular sting of having a cherished memory weaponized against her. Something had shifted during those 3 minutes in the bathroom, some fundamental understanding of what she was willing to accept and what she would fight against. Maya walked directly toward the main exit, her pace steady and unhurried. As she had expected, Brittany fell into step beside her, while Chloe appeared from the opposite direction to block any potential escape routes. It was a well-practiced maneuver, the kind of casual intimidation that Jessica's crew had perfected over years of practice. "Hey, Maya," Brittany said with artificial friendliness. "Jessica wanted me to give you something." She held out a small plastic bag containing what looked like cheap jewelry from a dollar store. Inside was a bracelet so obviously fake that it was almost insulting. A chunky chain with an oversized charm in the shape of a butterfly instead of a hummingbird. The message was clear. This is what you deserve. This is your proper place in the social hierarchy. "She thought you might want a replacement," Chloe added, her voice lacking Brittany's confident cruelty. She looked uncomfortable with her role in this theater, but not uncomfortable enough to refuse to participate. Maya stopped walking and looked at the offered bag for a long moment. Around them, the hallway had grown quiet except for the distant sound of locker doors slamming and the janitor's cart squeaking somewhere in the distance. This was the moment of choice, the fork in the road that would determine how the rest of her time at Riverside High would unfold. She could take the bag, accept the humiliation, and hope that Jessica would lose interest if she proved herself sufficiently submissive. It was the safe choice, the smart choice, the choice that would cause the least immediate disruption to her already precarious social position. Or she could refuse. "Tell Jessica thank you," Maya said carefully, "but I don't need a replacement." Brittany's smile sharpened. "Come on, don't be like that. She's trying to be nice. The least you could do is show some gratitude." "I said no thank you." Maya's voice remained level, but there was something in her tone that made both girls look at her more closely. "I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not interested." "Not interested?" Brittany laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're kidding, right? After what happened in chemistry, you should be grateful that Jessica is even thinking about you." Maya met her eyes directly for the first time since the conversation began. "Why would I be grateful for someone destroying my property and then offering me garbage as a replacement?" The bluntness of the statement seemed to surprise both girls. They were used to operating in a world of implications and subtle cruelties, where the real meaning was always hidden beneath layers of plausible deniability. Maya's direct acknowledgement of what had actually happened stripped away that protective veneer. and forced them to confront the reality of their actions. "That's not what happened," Chloe said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "It was an accident. Jessica was just trying to help with the experiment and—" "No," Maya interrupted quietly. "It wasn't an accident. She cut my bracelet on purpose, in front of 28 witnesses, and now she's having you offer me this." She gestured at the plastic bag. "I'm not stupid, and I'm not grateful, and I'm not interested in playing whatever game this is." Brittany's face flushed red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, Maya couldn't tell. "You know what? Fine, be that way. But don't come crying to us when you realize what you just threw away. Jessica Chen doesn't make offers like this to just anyone." "I understand," Maya said. "And my answer is still no." She walked past them toward the exit, half expecting one of them to grab her arm or block her path physically. But they seemed too shocked by her refusal to react immediately. Maya had broken the script they were used to following, had refused to play the role of grateful victim that their entire performance depended on. It wasn't until she was outside in the afternoon sunshine that Maya allowed herself to breathe fully. Her hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline, but she felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. A sense of her own agency, her own power to choose how she would respond to cruelty. The victory was small and probably temporary, but it was hers. For the first time since arriving at Riverside High, Maya Rodriguez had stood up for herself. The consequences of that choice remained to be seen, but in this moment, walking across the parking lot toward her father's battered pickup truck, she felt stronger than she had in months. Carlos Rodriguez was waiting by the truck, his work clothes dusty and his face lined with fatigue from a day of manual labor. But his eyes lit up when he saw his daughter approaching, and Maya felt a rush of love for this man who worked so hard to provide for their family despite the constant uncertainty of his employment. "¿Cómo estás, mija?" he asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. "How was school today?" Maya opened her mouth to give him the standard response, the careful lie that would prevent him from worrying about problems he couldn't solve. But something made her pause, some new understanding of what it meant to live truthfully, even when the truth was painful. "It was difficult," she said carefully, not wanting to burden him with the full story, but unwilling to dismiss her own experience entirely. "But I handled it." Carlos studied her face with the practiced eye of a father who had learned to read his daughter's moods across 7 schools and countless difficult days. He could see the evidence of tears in her slightly swollen eyes, could sense the tension in her carefully controlled posture, but he could also see something else, a new kind of strength, a quiet determination that hadn't been there that morning. "Sometimes," he said as he started the truck, "the most important thing is not what happens to us, but how we choose to respond to what happens to us." Maya nodded, thinking about the broken bracelet in her pocket and the plastic bag she had refused to accept. Abuela used to say something similar. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," Carlos said softly. "She would be proud of how strong you've become." They drove home in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Maya watched the familiar landscape roll past the windows, the strip malls and chain restaurants that could have been anywhere in America. In a few hours, she would have to face the homework she had ignored, the classes she would attend tomorrow, the continued reality of existing in Jessica Chen's sphere of influence. But something fundamental had changed during those few minutes in the hallway. Maya had discovered that she could say no, that she could choose dignity over safety, truth over convenience. It was a dangerous discovery in many ways, one that would almost certainly make her life more difficult in the short term. Yet, as they pulled into the driveway of their small rental house, Maya found herself looking forward to tomorrow for the first time since arriving at Riverside High. Not because she expected it to be easy, but because she finally understood that she had more power than she had realized. The broken chain was still in her pocket, its weight a constant reminder of what she had lost. But Maya was beginning to understand that some things, once broken, could be rebuilt into something stronger than they had been before. The question now was whether she would have the courage to find out what that something might be. Inside the house, Elena Rodriguez was preparing dinner with the efficient movements of someone who had learned to create comfort food from whatever ingredients were available. The smell of sofrito and beans filled the small kitchen, transforming their modest space into something that felt like home, rather than just another temporary stop on their journey through America. "Mija," Elena called out as Maya dropped her backpack by the door. "Come, tell me about your day. And wash your hands first. Dinner will be ready soon." Maya paused in the doorway, looking at her mother's back as she stirred the pot on the stove. Elena Rodriguez had sacrificed more than anyone for their family's survival, had given up her own dreams of education and advancement to ensure that her daughter would have opportunities she had never enjoyed. She deserved to know the truth about what Maya was facing, deserved to be trusted with the reality of their situation, but she also deserved to eat dinner without worrying about problems she couldn't solve, deserved to believe that her sacrifices were creating the better life she had always envisioned for her family. The decision of what to share and what to protect was one of the most difficult aspects of Maya's daily existence. "School was fine, Mommy," Maya said, making the choice to preserve her mother's peace of mind for a little while longer. "Just the usual things." Elena turned to study her daughter's face with the same careful attention Carlos had shown in the truck. Mothers, Maya had learned, were even better at reading between the lines than fathers. But Elena also understood the delicate balance of information that allowed their family to function, the careful distribution of worries and concerns that kept them all moving forward. "Wash your hands," Elena said again. But her voice was gentler now, filled with the kind of understanding that didn't require words. "And then help me set the table. Your father will be hungry when he finishes his shower." As Maya washed her hands at the kitchen sink, she caught sight of her reflection in the window above the faucet. The girl looking back at her appeared older somehow, marked by experiences that couldn't be easily erased or forgotten. But there was something else in her expression, something that reminded Maya of the photographs of Abuela Carmen as a young woman, before life had worn her down but not worn her out. Maybe strength was hereditary, passed down through generations of women who had faced impossible choices and found ways to survive them. Maybe the hummingbird charm hadn't been the source of Maya's resilience, but simply a reminder of something that had been inside her all along. The thought was both comforting and terrifying, because it meant that tomorrow's challenges would have to be faced with her own resources, rather than the protective power of a family heirloom. But as Maya helped her mother set the table for dinner, she found herself cautiously optimistic about what those resources might prove capable of accomplishing. Outside, the sun was setting over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made even their modest neighborhood look beautiful. Somewhere across town, Jessica Chen was probably planning her next move, calculating how to respond to Maya's unexpected defiance. But for now, in this moment, Maya was exactly where she belonged. Home, safe, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. The broken bracelet was still in her pocket, but Maya was beginning to understand that some gifts transcended their physical forms. Abuela Carmen's real legacy wasn't silver or charms or jewelry that could be destroyed by cruel teenage girls. It was the knowledge that joy and resilience could coexist, that strength came not from avoiding pain but from refusing to let pain define you. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities, to discover what she was truly capable of. But tonight, Maya Rodriguez was content to be exactly who she was, a survivor, a fighter, and a young woman who was finally learning to trust in her own power. The viral video notification appeared on Maya's phone at exactly 6:47 a.m., 3 hours before she was supposed to leave for school. She had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and dreading the day ahead, when the soft ping of her notifications broke through her anxiety. What she saw on her screen made her stomach drop to somewhere around her ankles. Someone had recorded yesterday's chemistry class incident. The video, titled "Rich Girl Destroys Poor Girl's Bracelet, You Won't Believe What Happens Next," already had over 50,000 views and hundreds of comments. Maya's hands trembled as she watched herself on the small screen, saw the desperation in her face as she searched for the hummingbird charm, heard Jessica's cruel laughter echoing through her phone's tiny speaker. The angle was perfect, capturing every detail of Jessica's deliberate cruelty and Maya's helpless response. Whoever had filmed it must have started recording the moment Jessica produced the scissors, which meant this wasn't a spontaneous decision, but a planned piece of entertainment. Maya scrolled through the comments, each one feeling like a fresh wound. "This is so messed up. Why didn't anyone help her? That rich girl is absolutely evil. The way she's searching for that charm is breaking my heart. Someone needs to expose this Jessica girl. This is why I hate rich kids. They think they can do whatever they want." But mixed in with the sympathy were comments that made Maya's chest tighten with anxiety. "Drama queen much, just buy a new bracelet. Probably staged for attention. Why is she even wearing jewelry to chemistry class? Poor people always playing victim. Maya closed the app and buried her face in her pillow, trying to process what this meant for her already precarious situation at Riverside High. Being the subject of a viral video was never good, but being the victim in a viral video about bullying was somehow worse. It invited a kind of scrutiny and judgment that she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. Her phone buzzed again, then again, and again. Friend requests, messages from strangers, notifications from social media platforms she didn't even use regularly. The video was spreading faster than she could track, jumping from platform to platform as people shared it with their own commentary and outrage. A knock on her bedroom door made her jump. "Mija, breakfast is ready," Elena called softly. "You need to get up or you'll be late for school." Maya pulled on her robe and shuffled to the kitchen, where her parents were already seated at their small table. Carlos was reading something on his phone with a frown, while Elena busied herself with serving eggs and toast. The atmosphere felt different, charged with an undercurrent of tension that made Maya's anxiety spike even higher. "Maya," Carlos said carefully, setting down his phone, "we need to talk about something." Elena turned from the stove, her face etched with concern. "Mrs. Patterson called this morning. She said there's a video on the internet about what happened in your chemistry class yesterday." Maya's heart sank. Mrs. Patterson was their elderly neighbor, who had taken it upon herself to keep an eye on the Rodriguez family ever since they had moved in 3 months ago. She was kind but also prone to dramatic reactions to anything she perceived as threatening to her family. "People are sharing it everywhere," Carlos continued. "Mrs. Patterson said her granddaughter in college sent it to her. Maya, why didn't you tell us what really happened yesterday?" The weight of their concerned stares was almost unbearable. Maya had spent so much energy protecting her parents from the daily realities of her school experience that she had forgotten how much worse it would be for them to discover the truth secondhand. "I didn't want you to worry," she said quietly. "There wasn't anything you could do to fix it." Elena sat down across from her daughter, reaching out to touch Maya's hand. "Mija, we're your parents. Worrying about you is our job. And there are always things we can do, even when it doesn't feel that way." "Like what?" Maya asked, and she couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. "Called the school? They'll say it was an accident, just kids being kids. Complain to Jessica's parents? Her father owns half this town. Transfer schools again? With what money?" The practical limitations of their situation hung in the air like smoke, choking off easy solutions or parental reassurances. Carlos worked with his hands for wages that barely covered their basic expenses. Elena cleaned houses for women who spent more on handbags than the Rodriguez family spent on groceries in a month. They lived carefully, constantly aware of how quickly their precarious stability could collapse. But Elena Rodriguez had not survived 38 years of poverty, immigration, and single motherhood to be intimidated by a teenage girl, no matter how wealthy her family might be. "Show me the video," she said firmly. Maya reluctantly pulled up the clip on her phone, watching her parents' faces as they absorbed what their daughter had endured. Carlos's jaw tightened with each passing second, while Elena's expression grew increasingly cold. When Jessica's voice came through the speaker, mocking Maya about welfare checks and fake jewelry, Elena's hands clenched into fists. "That little brat," Elena whispered, and Maya was shocked to hear genuine anger in her mother's voice. Elena rarely allowed herself the luxury of rage, considering it an emotion that poor people couldn't afford. But watching her daughter's humiliation had apparently crossed a line that even Elena's careful self-control couldn't maintain. "We're going to the school," Carlos announced, standing up from the table with the kind of decisive energy that Maya recognized from her earliest memories. This was her father in problem-solving mode, the man who had moved their family across 3 states chasing work and better opportunities. "Papa, no," Maya said quickly. "It'll just make things worse. Jessica's family has money, connections. We can't fight people like that." "We can try," Elena said simply. "Your grandmother didn't raise me to back down from bullies, and I'm not raising you to accept this kind of treatment." Maya felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of Abuela Carmen, whose bracelet still lay broken in pieces in Maya's desk drawer. She had tried to repair it the night before, but the delicate chain had snapped in too many places, and she lacked both the tools and expertise needed for proper jewelry restoration. Besides, Carlos added, pulling up something else on his phone, you're not the only one who's angry about this. Look. He showed Maya the comment section again, but this time focused on a different type of response. Mixed in with the usual internet outrage were comments from people who claimed to know Jessica Chen, who shared their own stories of her behavior, who were calling for real consequences rather than just online sympathy. Jessica Chen from Riverside High. This is the girl who made my cousin transfer schools last year. I went to middle school with her. She was evil even then. Her dad, Richard Chen, owns Chen Restaurant Group. He needs to see what his daughter is doing. Someone should send this to Channel 7 News. They love stories about bullying. This girl has been terrorizing kids for years. Finally, someone caught it on video. Maya scrolled through dozens of similar comments, each one revealing another piece of Jessica's history of cruelty. It seemed that her reign of terror at Riverside High was well known throughout the community, but this was the first time anyone had been able to document it so clearly. Maybe, Elena said thoughtfully, we're not as powerless as we think we are. An hour later, Maya found herself walking through the front doors of Riverside High, flanked by both her parents, an arrangement that felt both mortifying and oddly comforting. Students stared as they passed, some whispering to their friends, others openly filming with their phones. Maya kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The main office was bustling with its usual morning chaos when they arrived. Secretary Mrs. Henderson looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who had already dealt with more drama than she wanted to handle before 8 a.m. We need to speak with Principal Williams, Carlos said firmly, about the incident involving our daughter yesterday. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted from routine irritation to something approaching sympathy. Oh, you're Maya's parents. Yes, we've been expecting you. Please have a seat. I'll let Mr. Williams know you're here. As they waited, Maya became increasingly aware of the activity around them. The phone rang constantly, with Mrs. Henderson fielding calls about the video and the incident with practiced efficiency. Other parents arrived, some looking concerned, others appearing angry. Maya recognized Mrs. Peterson, the chemistry teacher's wife, speaking in hushed tones with another woman about liability and proper supervision. Maya Rodriguez and family, please come in, Mrs. Henderson called out, after what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. Principal Williams was a thin man in his 50s, who had the particular brand of exhaustion that came from trying to manage teenagers for decades. His office walls were covered with motivational posters and student artwork, the kind of carefully curated environment designed to project competence and caring to visiting parents. He was not alone. Seated across from his desk were Richard Chen and his wife Patricia, Jessica's parents. Richard Chen was exactly what Maya had expected. Expensive suit, confident posture, the kind of presence that commanded attention and respect. Patricia Chen was more surprising, smaller and more delicate than Maya had imagined, with worry lines around her eyes that suggested she might not be entirely comfortable with her daughter's behavior. Please, sit down, Principal Williams said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. I think we all know why we're here. Do we? Elena asked coolly, her voice carrying an edge that made Maya glance at her in surprise. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my daughter was assaulted, and no one seems interested in addressing that fact. Richard Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. Assaulted is a very strong word, Mrs. Rodriguez. What happened yesterday was an unfortunate accident between two students. Teenagers can be careless with scissors during lab work. Accident. Carlos's voice was dangerously quiet. Mr. Chen, have you seen the video? I've seen a brief edited clip taken out of context, Richard replied smoothly. Videos can be very misleading, as I'm sure you understand. They rarely tell the complete story. Maya watched this exchange with growing amazement. Her parents, who she had always seen as powerless in the face of authority, were holding their own against one of the wealthiest men in town. Elena sat straighter in her chair, while Carlos spoke with the kind of calm certainty that came from years of dealing with bosses who tried to intimidate workers. The complete story, Elena said, is that your daughter deliberately destroyed my daughter's property in front of an entire classroom, property that belonged to her deceased grandmother and was irreplaceable. Patricia Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I'm sure Jessica didn't realize the sentimental value of the bracelet. She's been under a lot of stress lately with college applications, and stress doesn't excuse cruelty, Maya said suddenly, her own voice surprising her. All eyes turned toward her, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she continued. And it wasn't an accident. She told me she was going to cut it, and then she did exactly what she said she would do. That's enough, Richard Chen said sharply. I won't sit here and listen to my daughter be slandered by... By what? Carlos interrupted, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. By who? Finish that sentence, Mr. Chen. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of Principal Williams's desk clock. Richard Chen's face had flushed red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, Maya couldn't tell. But his wife was looking at him with an expression that suggested she was seeing something she didn't like. Gentlemen, Principal Williams said quickly, let's all take a breath here. We're all concerned parents trying to do what's best for our children. Are we? Elena asked. Because it seems to me that some of us are more concerned with protecting reputations than addressing behavior. Maya felt a surge of pride in her mother's courage, mixed with terror about where this confrontation might lead. Elena was right, but being right didn't always translate into being safe, especially when you were facing people with the power to make your life significantly more difficult. Look, Principal Williams continued, I've reviewed the video, and while Jessica's actions were certainly inappropriate, I don't think we need to involve the police or make this into something bigger than it needs to be. Perhaps we could work out some kind of arrangement between the families. What kind of arrangement? Maya asked before her parents could respond. Principal Williams looked uncomfortable. Well, perhaps the Chen family could reimburse you for the cost of the bracelet, and Jessica could write a letter of apology. In exchange, you might consider not sharing the video any further or speaking to the media about the incident. Maya stared at him in disbelief. You want us to cover this up? I want us to handle this matter internally, Principal Williams corrected. These situations are always more complicated than they appear on social media. How much, Richard Chen asked suddenly, would it cost to replace the bracelet? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya could feel everyone waiting for her answer, could sense that her response would determine how the rest of this meeting proceeded. It would be so easy to name a price, to accept money in exchange for her silence, to make this whole nightmare disappear with a simple transaction. But as she sat there, surrounded by adults who seemed more interested in managing a crisis than addressing an injustice, Maya thought about Abuela Carmen and the stories she used to tell about standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Especially when it was difficult. It was priceless, Maya said quietly. You can't replace something that was made with love by someone who's gone forever. Patricia Chen's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to touch her husband's arm. Richard, maybe we should. Should what? He snapped. Pay extortion money to people who are obviously trying to take advantage of a simple misunderstanding? The mask of politeness finally slipped completely, revealing the contempt that had been lurking beneath Richard Chen's smooth exterior. Maya saw her parents exchange a look, some silent communication passing between them that she couldn't interpret. We're not asking for money, Carlos said firmly. We're asking for accountability. Your daughter hurt our daughter, and she needs to face consequences for her actions. Consequences? Richard laughed harshly. You want to destroy a 16-year-old girl's future over a piece of costume jewelry? Jessica is applying to Ivy League schools. A disciplinary record could ruin her entire life. What about my life? Maya asked, her voice stronger now. What about the life she's been ruining every day since I got here? What about all the other kids she's hurt over the years? That's enough accusations, Principal Williams said quickly. Maya, I understand you're upset, but we need to focus on this specific incident. Why? Elena asked. Why should we pretend this is an isolated event when everyone in this room knows it isn't? The question exposed the fundamental hypocrisy of the entire proceeding. They were all pretending that yesterday's incident existed in a vacuum, that Jessica Chen's behavior was an aberration rather than a pattern, that the solution was damage control rather than meaningful change. Maya felt something crystallize inside her, a clarity that cut through the confusion and fear she had been carrying for weeks. She stood up from her chair, surprising everyone in the room with the sudden movement. I don't want your money, she said, looking directly at Richard Chen. I don't want your daughter's fake apology. and I don't want to pretend that what happened was an accident when everyone knows it wasn't. Maya, Principal Williams said warningly, perhaps you should think carefully about what you're saying. I have thought about it, Maya replied. I've thought about it every day since I got here. Your daughter, she turned to face the Chens directly, is a bully. She's been terrorizing students at this school for years, and you've been covering for her because you have money and influence. But money can't change what happened yesterday, and influence can't erase a video that's been seen by hundreds of thousands of people. The room erupted in chaos. Richard Chen started shouting about lawsuits and defamation. Principal Williams demanded that Maya apologize immediately. Patricia Chen began crying openly, repeatedly saying, "I'm so sorry," to no one in particular. But through it all, Maya felt a strange sense of peace. She had finally said what needed to be said, had finally refused to participate in the careful dance of denial and enablement that had allowed Jessica's cruelty to flourish for so long. Elena and Carlos flanked their daughter, their presence a solid wall of support against the storm of adult outrage swirling around them. They might not have money or influence, but they had something more powerful: the unshakable conviction that their daughter deserved better than what she had been getting. As the shouting continued, Maya noticed something that made her smile for the first time in days. Through the principal's office window, she could see students gathering in the hallway, their faces pressed against the glass as they tried to understand what was happening inside. Word was spreading that Maya Rodriguez and her parents were taking on the Chen family, and for once, the gossip mill was working in her favor. Change, Maya realized, didn't always come from authority figures or formal procedures. Sometimes it came from people who were tired of accepting unacceptable behavior, who chose courage over comfort, truth over convenience. The hummingbird charm might be lost forever, but Maya was finally beginning to understand what her grandmother had meant about resilience. It wasn't about enduring pain silently or accepting injustice gracefully. It was about refusing to let other people's cruelty define your worth, about standing up for yourself even when the odds seemed impossible. The meeting was far from over, and Maya knew that the consequences of her defiance were only beginning to unfold. But for the first time since arriving at Riverside High, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be invisible anymore. The silence that followed Maya's declaration stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap under the weight of unspoken truths. Principal Williams sat frozen behind his desk, his pen hovering over a notepad as if he had been about to write something crucial but had forgotten what it was. Richard Chen's face had progressed from red to purple, while his wife Patricia continued to dab at her eyes with a tissue that had long since been reduced to shreds. Then, unexpectedly, Patricia Chen stood up. "She's right," Patricia said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Our daughter is a bully, and we've been enabling her for years." The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Richard Chen spun to face his wife, his expression shifting from anger to shock to something approaching panic. "Patricia, you don't know what you're saying. The stress of this situation—" "I know exactly what I'm saying," Patricia interrupted, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've known for years that something was wrong with how Jessica treats other children. I've seen the way she talks about her classmates, the cruel things she says about anyone she considers beneath her. I told myself it was just typical teenage behavior, that she would grow out of it, but I was lying to myself." Maya watched this unexpected turn of events with amazement. She had prepared herself for a united front from the Chen family, for wealth and influence to close ranks against her working-class honesty. But Patricia Chen's confession was splitting that unity right down the middle, creating cracks that no amount of money could repair. "Patricia, please," Richard said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Think about what you're doing. Think about Jessica's future, her college applications." "I am thinking about her future," Patricia replied firmly. "And if we don't address this now, if we keep covering for her and making excuses, what kind of person is she going to become? What kind of adult will she be if she never learns that actions have consequences?" Elena Rodriguez leaned forward slightly in her chair, her eyes never leaving Patricia's face. "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something?" Patricia nodded, still clutching her destroyed tissue. "How long have you known?" Elena asked gently. "About Jessica's behavior toward other students." The question seemed to deflate Patricia completely. She sank back into her chair, her shoulders sagging under the weight of years of willful blindness. Since middle school, she admitted. Maybe earlier. There were always complaints from other parents. Always stories about Jessica being, quote, difficult or, quote, competitive. But Richard would handle it, would make phone calls or write checks, and the problems would go away. They didn't go away, Maya said quietly. They just moved to different kids. Patricia's eyes filled with fresh tears. I know that now. I should have known it then, but it was easier to believe that everyone else was exaggerating. That our daughter couldn't possibly be as cruel as people said she was. Richard Chen had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. This is ridiculous, he said finally. One edited video and suddenly we're treating our daughter like a criminal? Jessica is a good kid who made a mistake. She doesn't deserve to have her entire future destroyed because some people can't handle a little competition. The word competition hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized that Richard Chen genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, his daughter's systematic cruelty was just aggressive ambition. Her deliberate destruction of other people's happiness was simply the natural result of being raised to win at all costs. Mr. Chen, Carlos said carefully, cutting up a child's jewelry isn't competition, it's sadism. Don't you dare lecture me about parenting, Richard snapped. My daughter will be attending an Ivy League university next year. She's a National Merit Scholar, student council president, captain of the debate team. What has your daughter accomplished other than generating sympathy on the internet? The insult was designed to wound, and Maya felt it hit its target. But instead of the crushing shame she had expected, she felt something else entirely. Pity. Pity for a man who measured his daughter's worth only in achievements and accolades, who had raised a child to believe that success justified any amount of cruelty toward others. She's accomplished something your daughter never has, Maya said quietly. She's learned how to be kind. The simplicity of the statement seemed to catch everyone off guard. In a room full of adults arguing about consequences and futures and institutional procedures, Maya's observation cut straight to the heart of what really mattered. Kindness wasn't something that could be bought or achieved or awarded. It was something that grew from understanding that other people's pain mattered as much as your own. Principal Williams cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should discuss concrete steps moving forward. Mrs. Chen, are you saying that you would support disciplinary action for Jessica? Patricia looked at her husband, then back at the principal. What I'm saying is that our daughter needs help. Real help, not just consequences. She needs to understand why what she did was wrong, and she needs to learn how to feel empathy for other people. If that means suspension or counseling or whatever else you think is appropriate, then yes, I support it. Absolutely not, Richard said immediately. I will not allow my daughter's academic record to be damaged because of this hysteria. Jessica will apologize privately to the Rodriguez family, will pay for a replacement bracelet, and this matter will be closed. The bracelet can't be replaced, Maya said for what felt like the 100th time. And a private apology doesn't help all the other kids she's hurt over the years. What other kids? Principal Williams asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Maya pulled out her phone and opened the social media app where the video had first appeared. The comments section had exploded overnight, with hundreds of responses from current and former Riverside High students sharing their own experiences with Jessica Chen's cruelty. Emma Morrison, class of 2023, Maya read aloud, says Jessica spread rumors that she was cheating on the SATs, which got her acceptance to State University revoked. Tyler Brooks, class of 2024, says Jessica convinced his girlfriend to break up with him by showing her fake text messages. Sarah Kim, current junior, says Jessica has been excluding her from group projects for 2 years because her family owns a competing restaurant. She scrolled through more comments, each one revealing another piece of Jessica's pattern of systematic cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming, painting a picture of a young woman who had spent years perfecting the art of psychological warfare against her peers. These are just allegations, Richard said weakly, but even he seemed shaken by the sheer volume of accusations. They're testimonies, Elena corrected. From children who were too scared to speak up before because they knew no one would believe them against your daughter. Principal Williams was frantically taking notes, his pen scratching across the paper as he tried to keep up with the growing list of incidents. Maya could see the panic in his eyes as he realized the scope of what his school had been ignoring for years. "This changes things," he said finally. "If even half of these allegations are true, we're looking at a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond yesterday's incident." "They're not allegations," Patricia said quietly. "They're probably all true. I've heard Jessica talk about most of these kids. I've heard her laugh about the pain she's caused them." She turned to face Maya directly. "I am so deeply sorry for what my daughter has done to you and to so many others. There's no excuse for it, and there's no excuse for Richard and me allowing it to continue." The apology was genuine. Maya could hear it in the tremor of Patricia's voice and see it in the way she couldn't quite meet anyone's eyes. But it also felt insufficient, like trying to heal a massive wound with a small bandage. Years of enabled cruelty couldn't be undone with a single moment of parental clarity. "What happens now?" Carlos asked, his voice cutting through the emotional weight of the moment to focus on practical realities. Principal Williams set down his pen and looked around the room, his expression that of a man who had suddenly realized he was in far deeper water than he had initially understood. "I'm going to have to conduct a formal investigation into these allegations. In the meantime, Jessica will be suspended pending the outcome of that investigation." "For how long?" Richard demanded. "That depends on what we discover," Principal Williams replied. "But, given the scope of what we're potentially dealing with, it could be significant." Richard Chen stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. "This is unacceptable. I will not allow my daughter to be railroaded by a mob of vindictive teenagers looking for their 15 minutes of fame." "Mr. Chen," Principal Williams said carefully, The evidence suggests that people are willing to pile on to an innocent girl because it makes them feel better about their own failures." Richard interrupted. "Jessica is being targeted because she's successful, because she comes from a good family, because she represents everything these other kids wish they could be." Maya felt a flash of anger so intense it made her vision blur momentarily. This man was watching his daughter's victims speak their truth and dismissing their pain as jealousy. He was so committed to protecting his own family's reputation that he couldn't acknowledge the reality of what Jessica had done to others. "Mr. Chen," Maya said, standing up to face him directly, "your daughter cut up my grandmother's bracelet because she enjoyed watching me suffer. That's not success, that's sickness. And if you can't see the difference, then you're part of the problem." The confrontation might have escalated further, but at that moment, there was a knock on the principal's office door. Mrs. Henderson peered in, her expression apologetic but urgent. "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a reporter from Channel 7 News here. She says she's received multiple tips about a bullying incident and would like to speak with the families involved." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Where before it had been tense with interpersonal conflict, now it was charged with the recognition that their private drama was about to become very public indeed. "Tell them we have no comment," Richard said quickly. "Actually," Elena said, standing up beside her daughter, "tell them we'll be right out." The declaration surprised everyone, including Maya. Her mother had always been intensely private, had spent years teaching Maya to keep family business within the family, to avoid drawing attention from authorities or media that might complicate their already precarious situation. "Elena," Carlos said quietly, "are you sure about this?" Elena Rodriguez looked at her husband, then at her daughter, then at the Chen family sitting across from them. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every sacrifice she had made, every indignity she had endured, every time she had bitten her tongue in the face of injustice. "I'm tired of being quiet," she said simply. "I'm tired of letting people with money and power decide what's acceptable and what isn't. Our daughter was attacked, and if telling her story publicly is what it takes to make sure it doesn't happen to other children, then that's what we're going to do." Patricia Chen nodded slowly. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're absolutely right." "Patricia, don't be ridiculous," Richard said desperately. "Think about what you're saying. Think about the consequences." "I am thinking about the consequences," Patricia replied, her voice growing stronger. I'm thinking about what happens to Jessica if she never learns that her actions have real impacts on real people. I'm thinking about what happens to all the children she might hurt in the future if we keep protecting her from accountability. She stood up and walked toward the door, pausing only to look back at her husband. Richard, I love our daughter, but I love her too much to let her continue down this path. If you want to help her, really help her, then you'll support getting her the professional help she needs instead of just throwing money at the problem. Richard Chen remained seated, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. If you walk out that door and talk to those reporters, you'll destroy everything we've worked to build. Patricia's hand was already on the doorknob. If our success is built on our daughter's ability to torture other children without consequences, then maybe it deserves to be destroyed. And with that, she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving her husband alone with his anger and his denials. Maya, Elena, and Carlos followed her out, with Principal Williams trailing behind like a man walking to his own execution. In the hallway, they found not just one reporter but several, along with camera crews and a growing crowd of students who had been dismissed from their first-period classes to witness the unfolding drama. The questions came fast and overlapping, a cacophony of voices all asking variations of the same thing. What had happened? Why had it happened? What was being done about it? Maya felt overwhelmed by the attention, by the bright lights and pointing cameras, but her mother's steady hand on her shoulder kept her grounded. My daughter was bullied, Elena said clearly, her voice carrying over the crowd noise. Her grandmother's bracelet was deliberately destroyed by another student, and when we tried to address the issue through proper channels, we were told to keep quiet and accept money in exchange for our silence. The reporters scribbled frantically, their questions becoming more specific, more pointed. What was the school's response? Had there been other incidents? What did Maya want to see happen next? I want other kids to know they don't have to suffer in silence, Maya said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. I want parents to understand that wealth and status don't give their children the right to hurt others. And I want schools to protect students, instead of protecting their own reputations. Behind them, through the principal's office window, Richard Chen sat alone at the conference table, his phone pressed to his ear as he made what Maya assumed were frantic calls to lawyers and crisis management specialists. But his wife was standing with the Rodriguez family, adding her own voice to theirs as she confirmed the pattern of behavior they were describing. Jessica needs help, Patricia told the reporters, tears streaming down her face but her voice clear and determined. She needs professional intervention, and she needs to understand that her actions have consequences. I should have insisted on this years ago, and I will never forgive myself for the pain that my failure to act has caused to so many children. As the impromptu press conference continued, Maya felt something shift inside her chest. The broken bracelet was still gone, irreplaceable and irretrievable. Jessica Chen would still face consequences that might alter the trajectory of her life. The Rodriguez family would still have to navigate the complex aftermath of going public with their story. But something else had been created in the process. A space for truth-telling, a moment when victims could speak and be believed, a recognition that empathy and accountability mattered more than wealth and status. Maya thought about her grandmother's stories of resilience, about the hummingbird's ability to find joy even in difficult circumstances. Maybe the charm itself was gone, but the lesson it represented had taken root in ways that could never be destroyed. Maya Rodriguez had found her voice, her family had found their courage, and together they had proven that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance could create the biggest changes. The morning sun streamed through the school's windows, illuminating the faces of students and reporters and parents who had gathered to witness this moment of reckoning. It wasn't the ending Maya had imagined when she first walked through Riverside High's doors, but it was better than anything she could have hoped for. She was no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer afraid. And that transformation, born from loss but nurtured by love, was worth more than any piece of jewelry could ever be. 3 months later, Maya Rodriguez walked through the hallways of Riverside High with her head held high, no longer the invisible new girl who had once tried so desperately to blend into the background. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it certainly hadn't been easy, but the girl who now navigated the crowded corridors with quiet confidence bore little resemblance to the terrified teenager who had watched her grandmother's bracelet shatter on a chemistry classroom floor. The media attention following that explosive morning in Principal Williams's office had been intense but mercifully brief. Local news stations had run the story for a week, with follow-up pieces about bullying prevention and the responsibility of schools to protect vulnerable students. The original video had been viewed over 2 million times before Maya had made the decision to have it taken down, not because she was ashamed of what it showed, but because she was ready to move forward, rather than remain frozen in that moment of victimization. Jessica Chen had not returned to Riverside High. After the investigation revealed a pattern of systematic bullying spanning 4 years, the Chen family had quietly enrolled their daughter in a private therapeutic boarding school in Vermont. The decision had reportedly caused a significant rift between Richard and Patricia Chen, with Patricia ultimately filing for divorce and taking up residence in her sister's guest house across town. Maya had mixed feelings about Jessica's fate. Part of her felt satisfaction that there had finally been consequences for years of cruelty. But another part recognized the tragedy of a young woman so thoroughly damaged by privilege and enablement that she had lost the ability to see other people as fully human. The last Maya had heard, Jessica was making progress in therapy, slowly learning to develop the empathy that should have been nurtured years earlier. Brittany Walsh and Chloe Martinez had faced their own reckonings. Without Jessica's protection, their own cruel behaviors had become more visible to teachers and administrators. Brittany had been suspended twice for harassment, while Chloe had transferred to a different school district where her aunt lived. Maya occasionally wondered if they had learned anything from watching their leader's downfall, or if they were simply more careful about who they chose as targets. The chemistry classroom where it all began had become something of a shrine among the student body. Mr. Peterson, shaken by his failure to prevent the incident, had implemented new policies about supervision and student behavior. But more importantly, the room had become a symbol of transformation, a place where speaking truth to power had actually worked. Maya's family had weathered the aftermath better than she had expected. Carlos had worried about retaliation from Richard Chen's business connections, but if anything, the publicity had led to more work opportunities as contractors who had seen the news coverage reached out with projects. Elena had been approached by several families who specifically requested her cleaning services after seeing her defend her daughter so eloquently on television. The broken bracelet still sat in Maya's jewelry box, its pieces carefully preserved in a small velvet pouch. She had never attempted to repair it again, understanding now that some things were meant to remain broken as reminders of what had been endured and overcome. Instead, for her 16th birthday, her parents had presented her with a different gift. A delicate silver necklace bearing a hummingbird pendant, similar to but distinct from the one she had lost. "It's not a replacement," Elena had explained as Maya had opened the carefully wrapped box. "It's a celebration of who you've become." Maya wore the necklace every day, but she understood that her strength no longer came from external talismans. The courage she had discovered in standing up to Jessica Chen had grown into something more permanent, a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and her place in the world. The changes at Riverside High extended far beyond Maya's personal transformation. Principal Williams had resigned 2 weeks after the media coverage, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities. His replacement, Dr. Sarah Martinez, had implemented comprehensive anti-bullying policies and established a peer mediation program that was already showing promising results. More significantly, the incident had sparked conversations throughout the district about the ways that wealth and status could insulate students from consequences. School board meetings, once sparsely attended affairs, now drew crowds of parents demanding transparency and accountability. The culture of silent enablement that had protected Jessica Chen for so long was being systematically dismantled. Maya had become something of a reluctant celebrity among her peers, though she tried to downplay the attention. Younger students sought her out for advice about dealing with bullies, while teachers used her story as an example of why speaking up mattered. She had been invited to speak at several middle schools about bullying prevention, experiences that had taught her the power of sharing her story to help others find their own voices. But perhaps the most meaningful change had been in Maya's relationship with her classmates. The same students who had once watched Jessica's cruelty in silence now made active efforts to include her in conversations and activities. Marcus Johnson, the student who had originally filmed the chemistry class incident, had become one of her closest friends, bonding over their shared understanding of what it meant to document injustice. Emma Morrison, the girl whose college acceptance had been revoked due to Jessica's false accusations, had reached out to Maya through social media. She was now thriving at a different university and had started a support group for bullying victims that met online twice a month. Maya attended regularly, finding comfort in connecting with others who understood the long-term impacts of systematic cruelty. The legal aftermath had been complex but ultimately satisfying. Richard Chen had initially threatened multiple lawsuits against the Rodriguez family, the school district, and various media outlets. However, as more victims came forward with their own stories and evidence, his legal position had become increasingly untenable. The cases had been quietly dropped in exchange for a substantial donation to anti-bullying organizations and a public apology from the Chen family. Maya's academic performance had improved dramatically once she was no longer spending mental energy on avoiding confrontations and managing anxiety. Her grades had risen to honor roll level, and she had joined the debate team, where her experience in standing up to authority figures served her well. College applications were still 2 years away, but Maya had begun to consider studying law or social work, fields where her passion for justice could make a real difference. The Rodriguez family had also made the decision to stay in Riverside permanently, the first time in Maya's memory that they hadn't started planning their next move within months of arriving somewhere new. Carlos had been offered a supervisory position with a local construction company, while Elena had started her own small cleaning business with several of Richard Chen's former clients specifically requesting her services. On this particular Tuesday morning, exactly 3 months after the chemistry class incident, Maya was walking to her first period when she noticed a commotion near the main office. A new student was standing with her parents, looking overwhelmed by the chaos of registration and locker assignments. The girl appeared to be around Maya's age, with dark hair and nervous eyes that darted around the hallway as if looking for escape routes. Maya recognized the posture immediately. Shoulders hunched protectively, backpack clutched like a shield, the particular kind of tension that came from being the outsider in a place where everyone else belonged. Without hesitation, Maya changed direction and approached the family. "Excuse me," she said gently, addressing the new student directly. "Are you starting here today? I'm Maya Rodriguez. I'd be happy to help you find your classes if you want." The girl's parents smiled gratefully, but Maya focused on the student herself, waiting for her to make the choice about whether to accept help. After a moment, the girl nodded shyly. "I'm Aisha Patel," she said quietly, "and yes, I have no idea where anything is." Maya spent her free period giving Aisha a comprehensive tour of the school, sharing not just the locations of classrooms and facilities, but also the unwritten social rules that could make the difference between thriving and merely surviving. She introduced Aisha to friendly teachers, pointed out which lunch tables were welcoming to newcomers, and most importantly, made sure Aisha had her phone number in case any problems arose. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Aisha asked as they finished the tour outside the cafeteria. "You don't even know me." Maya smiled, thinking about all the times she had wished someone would extend the same kindness to her. "Because everyone deserves to feel safe and welcome at school. And because someone once told me that the best way to heal from being hurt is to make sure other people don't have to experience the same pain." As Aisha headed off to her next class with a considerably more confident stride, Maya felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with external validation or recognition. This was what resilience actually looked like. Not the ability to endure suffering silently, but the capacity to transform pain into purpose. To use your own healing to create space for others to heal as well. The hummingbird necklace caught the light as Maya walked to her own class, but she barely noticed it. The symbol was lovely, but the reality it represented had become so deeply integrated into who she was that she no longer needed external reminders of her own strength. In her chemistry class, now taught by Ms. Angela Rivera, who had replaced the retiring Mr. Peterson, Maya took her assigned seat and pulled out her notebook. The room looked different with new safety posters and updated equipment, but Maya could still remember exactly where she had knelt, searching for her grandmother's charm on that terrible day 3 months ago. The memory no longer brought only pain. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far she had traveled, not just physically from her seat to the floor and back again, but emotionally and spiritually, from victim to survivor to advocate. The girl who had begged Jessica Chen not to cut her bracelet had discovered reserves of courage she never knew existed, had learned to use her voice as a weapon against injustice and a tool for healing. As Ms. Rivera began the day's lesson on chemical bonds and molecular structures, Maya found herself thinking about transformation once again. In chemistry, she had learned, breaking bonds required energy, but it also released energy that could be used to form new, stronger connections. Perhaps the same principle applied to people and relationships and the mysterious alchemy of growing up. Jessica Chen had broken something precious, something that could never be fully repaired. But in the process, she had also released energy that Maya had channeled into becoming someone stronger, kinder, and more committed to justice than she might have been otherwise. The broken bracelet had been transformed into broken silence, and that silence had become a voice that spoke for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of cruelty. Maya Rodriguez no longer needed a talisman to remind her of her grandmother's love or her own resilience. She carried both inside her now, woven into the fabric of who she had chosen to become. The hummingbird might have been lost, but its lesson had taken flight in ways that Abuela Carmen could never have imagined when she first fastened that delicate chain around her granddaughter's wrist. As the chemistry lesson continued and Maya carefully recorded notes about molecular bonds and energy transfer, she smiled at the elegant parallels between scientific principles and human experience. Sometimes the most beautiful creations emerged from the most painful destructions, and sometimes the strongest people were forged in the fires of their greatest challenges. The bracelet was gone, but Maya Rodriguez had discovered something far more valuable: the unshakable knowledge that she was worthy of respect, capable of defending herself, and powerful enough to create change in a world that often seemed designed to silence voices like hers. In the end, that discovery was worth more than any piece of jewelry, no matter how precious its origins or meaningful its symbolism. It was the kind of treasure that could never be cut by scissors, stolen by bullies, or lost to the chaos of teenage cruelty. It was hers to keep forever, and hers to share with anyone else who needed to remember that they too possessed the power to transform pain into purpose, silence into strength, and endings into beginnings. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.